Well, the funny thing about it,
You did talk there.
when they brought up Washington D.C., do you know that spot in front of the Capitol, in front of the White House? Would you mind like talking on camera a little bit about testimony earlier? Like, could I interview you?
In what context?
Well, I'll just ask some questions about like the point you were making and maybe bring up some of my concerns. I'll upload the whole video raw, so I won't be like cutting it or anything.
There you are.
Let's see. So I have about a minute.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So you spoke today at the graffiti ordinance hearing here at City Hall in Keene, and you brought up how in some parts of Washington D.C. it's illegal to chalk. They have an enforceable ordinance. Are you aware of anyone getting arrested for chalking in D.C. or getting in trouble?
There are arrests in D.C., but they have all been affirmed by the courts. Now, the question is whether the Manchester case, as you brought up, comes to bear, and it's interesting that the case is yet to be appealed. However, we do look at the Supreme Court law on the First Amendment, which would override that of any state court based on the principle of stare decisis. The Supreme Court ruling would overtake any state ruling on the First Amendment because of the hierarchy of the courts. So in that regard, if it were to eventually be appealed to the Supreme Court, it is likely, but of course not guaranteed, because no one ever knows what the 9 justices are going to do, that appeal would be accepted based on the fact that there are limitations to free speech, and those limitations are based on the idea that any restriction on speech needs to be narrowly tailored. So you couldn't have a broad-based, we can't have anybody speaking on the common, no signs in the common, nobody's allowed to walk in the common. It needs to be narrowly tailored and for a legitimate public interest, such as preserving the historic district. Now, if we were to have a citywide ban on no chalking anywhere in the city, obviously that would be unrealistic. For example, in Wheelock Park, it may be perfectly acceptable for an individual to create a Scotch Square. That we of course want to allow political speech in the city. We want to be able to have people hand out flyers. We want to have people be able to put up posters and signs in their yards. A great example, and this comes from the University of Florida School of Law, is that we want somebody to be able to walk down Marlborough Street advertising their political views. We don't want them using a bullhorn at 3 in the morning. One of those is an acceptable form of free speech. One of those is something that would not be protected under the First Amendment. So it's not whether or not there's free speech. I think we all want to agree with free speech, and as soon as we bring up free speech, it becomes a bit of a red herring. It's like bringing up puppy dogs and rainbows. Everybody is in favor of it, but where does the case law come down? And that's really one of those narrow things that is more difficult to discern. But in this area, the Supreme Court has been clear again and again and again. Narrowly tailored, specific government interest.
One aspect of Washington, D.C. that Keene, New Hampshire does not share is that there are designated free speech zones in Washington, D.C. Like, for example, in front of this, the White House, there's an area where people are not allowed to stand, they're not allowed to sit. They're allowed to have signs, but they have to remain moving. And if you stop moving, you can be arrested. I know I wouldn't want to see those sorts of areas here in Keene, so I'd rather just the whole area be a free speech zone. I know, like, Jehovah's Witnesses and different political interests will set up booths on sidewalks in Keene, and as far as I know, that's not restricted in any way.
I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses booths are restricted, but I also don't